On today's episode of the Post Call podcast, Google has an EHR. We've been fantasizing about it for years. They dropped a video. Is that a real thing? We're going to find out. Nike comes out with a shoe for quote-unquote everyday heroes. I suppose that's healthcare workers. And Emi Okamoto and myself are back. And while she did not celebrate Thanksgiving, I don't think, she probably had one of a dozen Cambodian holidays to celebrate.
Yes, there's so many. I was eating a cup of noodles. How was your Thanksgiving, Nick?
My Thanksgiving was great. I'm a huge fan of the Detroit Lions, and for years, they play every Thanksgiving. It's an American tradition, and they're really bad, but we watched them be really bad, and then we drank red wine, had turkey. It was great. I was in Montana with my parents. It was a wonderful trip. I love going back west every time I can. I know.
Yeah.
So exotic. This is the Post Call podcast. I am Nick Andrews. She is Dr. Emi Okamoto. And Emi, we've been talking a lot about burnout and blah, 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 and the EHR. And we said, if only Amazon or Google would do one. And then bam, they did one. We'll get to that in just a little bit, but I want to start with this Nike shoe. Nike released a shoe for doctors. So we got Google, we got Nike and healthcare. Did you see the shoe?
I did. Yeah, it was for Nike for everyday heroes, as they call us. And it looked comfortable, but apparently it's nothing more than an already existing shoe.
Correct. So as a has-been, total high school athlete has-been, it's just a Nike Air Zoom Plus for those of you that know what that is. And they can put a bunch of different crap in it. Here, the official Nike news, the press release. Product testing and medical worker insights, those on the ground, took place at this is the Oregon. Nike is located around Eugene and Portland. During the sessions, the designers, riggers, walking, blah, blah, blah. It's a Zoom Air Plus with maybe like a little bit more of an intense sole. However, it's got a bunch of healthcare stuff on it. It's got baby blue. It's got the Blue Cross thing. And it looks like, and I think this is part of it too, I think there's like a EKG or a heart monitor part of the design on the sole. So it's very, to me, cliche.
Oh.
Do you see it? Do you see it now that I pointed out?
I maybe some waves.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
It's
why would that be
interesting.
there, right? Exactly.
Yeah. So the Reddit community really took it to town.
Yes. So it was posted on Reddit. Twitter did not love it either. My initial impression was, oh, this is a really cool way to spend $20,000 and get a news article about yourself, because this is completely just go to Dick's Sporting Goods and get some real Zoom Air Pluses. And that's what basically Reddit said. This is fake.
Yeah.
So let's go through some of this
Yeah,
stuff.
it was interesting. I will say I used to feel the same way whenever it's like, oh, you guys in your sweatshops and all this stuff. But in Cambodia, a lot of the garment factories provide a lot of valuable jobs that people can't find elsewhere.
So, interesting. So is Nike, I have no idea where they are. I know that they are in Southeast Asia somewhere. Are they in Cambodia? I don't know.
I don't know either. A lot of the shops don't have their names on them. They just do the work and then.
That's interesting. So my question is, I mean, let's get into that real quick. That's a little bit of a diversion, but so there are providing jobs on the ground to people who need work and like a kind of restarting the economy because of the the tragedy that happened in Cambodia a couple generations ago. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and a lot of they'll pay around $170, $180 a month, which is more than, say, a farmer would get, which is one of the other big jobs that people have.
Oh,
so they will pay more than a lot of people. And there are a lot of NGOs working with them to give like free birth control, for example, through clinics in the garment factories.
That's
and
fascinating.
Work in the garment factories for social enterprise.
To me, that reminds me of America Industrial Revolution, where slowly workers are getting more rights. It's helpful. Then maybe generations down the line, children can go to college and improve them. That's an interesting take. I guess I've never thought. I always just assumed sweatshop was a dirty word. That's really interesting. But I guess they're not even sweatshops. They're just factories.
Mm-hmm. Yep. They're places where people work.
Mm-hmm. And somewhere they make these shoes. And what did you think? Honest opinion of the shoes. Is this just to grab headlines, or do you think that Nike really put in an honest effort to make a shoe specifically for people who are on their feet all day?
Yeah, it seems like a headline grab.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, seems like totally fake to me. But if you want to get them for anybody, you can find a link in the show notes. I do think that this should be a thing. Nike making healthcare gear. I don't know. I know that maybe you're not as familiar with college athletics as I am, but there is this thing in Division I and Division II college athletics called Nike Christmas. And Nike Christmas is when day one of the season comes. It's not necessarily Nike. It could be Adidas or Under Armour. It's when the season starts over. Every athlete individually gets, if I had to ballpark, $300 worth of Nike stuff. And it's stuff that you would travel in, stuff you could work in, but also just stuff like backpacks and water bottles and sports bras and sliders and socks and just a bunch of stuff that's branded. And I thought that this would be a really interesting way to combat burnout for residents, because if you had Nike Christmas as a resident every year, say in July, you got a water bottle and a bus pass and a backpack and nice shoes and stuff, and it was just free. That'd be great, but I don't know if Nike wants to dump in that kind of money.
Yeah.
But
yeah, if they could dump that into healthcare,
Nike, that would be a legitimate. That'd be much better than whatever this shoe is.
Yeah. But they did say that was interesting that nurses walk 4 to 5 miles a day, which seems way more than doctors walk, as I counted my steps back then.
Did you see the meme? You're not on Twitter, but there was a meme over Thanksgiving that was in pop culture, but that it was about doctors. So then doctors kind of chimed in, and the meme was, it was a quote on Twitter and said, "I'm sitting on an airplane next to my dad. Flight attendant says, 'We have a medical emergency. Is there a doctor on board?' My dad leans over and says, 'That could have been you.' And then somebody says something snappy. And then the most viral one that I saw from doctors was, if that happened, I would stand up and say, 'I'm a doctor. Is there a nurse here that can help me?' The nurse would know what to do." I thought that was a really good shout out to the nursing community and non-physician colleagues. Okay, so Nike's in healthcare, but so is Google, and we've been fantasizing about this in healthcare for a long time. They have an EHR. They have a video that says they're going to have an EHR. Did you watch the video?
Yes, it was a little beautiful 4-minute teaser from a practicing internist who works with Google. And it looks exactly like my Gmail box. And it's pretty fleshed out, it seems.
So the thing that I got most out of this was that, and I helped people navigate their way through Epic. And I know that Epic is considered to be one of the best huge EHRs, maybe not for single practice or smaller practices, but the thing that I always got was searching for crap is hard at Epic. Well, Google pretty much invented that. And this thing looks like it can search in the same way that actual Google can, and it knows your typos. It knows generic and scientific names of drugs. And it kind of knows what you're thinking the same way that Google can autocomplete your sentences and can kind of guess what you're watching on TV. This seems like it can do that, which seems like not only save time, but also improve accuracy.
Yeah. Yeah. And they highlighted all the beautiful things. So I'm just wondering what, all the things that physicians like, finding notes and finding antibiotics and lab values and trends. But they didn't really go into how that translates into the billing and note writing and getting all your 10-point review of systems. So it was a very strategic gloss over not to talk about what's probably the more annoying side for most people.
And that is what was ripped apart in the Reddit thread and on Twitter was, this seems great for doctors and patients, but it also seems like they did not specify how the hospital will make money on this. So I imagine that we're going to go back to what they called Epic the glorified cash register. Ouch.
Yeah.
But I've always maintained that a Silicon Valley company being involved in EHRs is what healthcare is missing. No disrespect to Madison. It's a great college town, and there are many talented people there, but I don't think the most talented people in the world are working on healthcare informatics, and that's the next step, in my opinion.
Yep. So, excited to see it happening at least.
Yes, and they talked to a doctor, and they also didn't pull punches. Apparently, in the video, there's Google. It's a Google EHR, not some half-assed thing. It looks like a Google EHR, which is great. Okay, so want to talk about Hahnemann Hospital. We've been covering this all year long on Post Call. This is a story that we found on Reddit as well, and it's disheartening and kind of, if I were involved or closer to the situation, it would be enraging. And it's the AMA, the American Medical Association, pledged $125,000 for relocation expenses for Hahnemann residents, and they're currently continuing to work to resolve other issues like immigration trials. So it's one of our Redditors broke down the math. 570 residents at Hahnemann University Hospital, 125,000 divided by 570 equates to $220 per resident for relocation and for legal fees if they were immigrants or they were working on visas. Not a great look for the AMA.
Yeah. I'm trying to look up the fee of dues because I'm sure it's something to that tune.
Well, that's like the license costs money. Taking your boards costs money. Getting in, like the step one costs money, and you're going to relocate.
Regular practice dues is $420.
Oh, great! So not even just over half. Wonderful. And this person points out that AMA's revenue in 2018 was $361 million. Could not even donate $1 million.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like they're putting out this whole promotion of we're helping them, but what it does bring up is not a lot of people are necessarily stepping up to help, except the hospitals that have employed them, right, which could be for their own gain as well. So
yeah, and of course, you and I were in Philly when this happened, and it's a Philly institution, so I've kind of had my finger on the. I've heard from people who heard very early on that this was no longer just like a kitschy rumor. This was actually going to happen. And what I found was that two institutions in particular really stepped up, and those were Temple in Philly and Cooper University Hospital, which is essentially in Philly right across the river in Camden, took on a huge amount of residents, and those programs are growing, but 570 residents. And they gave $125,000. That's not enough to buy the new Tesla truck.
Yeah, and they don't have a tail coverage. That's going to cost millions of dollars for whoever wants to figure that one out.
Yeah, and just to pile on, I found out that huge portions of the campus were infested with asbestos, and they got construction companies on campus in Philly to do an assessment of the situation. They were like, yeah, no, we're not going to tear it down because blocking off the streets would actually be too much of a pain in the ass. So there's just this asbestos-filled couple buildings, and they're like, yeah, they're condemned. We're not going to waste our money doing that, so they're just going to be there.
Oh, gosh.
This thing is a mess. It's an absolute mess. But our guest this week
have all the beautiful writing on them.
Those are so great. Medicine was here again. The Dr. Daniels interview. She was a surgical resident there. She's PGY2 at Hahnemann, and her recount of the final month at the hospital is one of the most beautiful interviews I've ever done as a professional journalist. Highly recommend you check it out, and we're going to be revisiting that in our best of episode coming up later this month to allow for the holidays. So it's time to talk about something positive as we just rip on Google, Nike, and the AMA. Dr. David Fajgenbaum is our guest this week, and Dr. Fajgenbaum was in medical training while he was diagnosed with a very rare, very terrible disease, and that is Castleman. He wrote a book, and he's our guest this week. So, Dr. Okamoto, could you refresh your memory what Castleman is?
Oh, yeah. It's a particularly rare form of leukemia, lymphoma. Gosh, I think it spans somewhere between the two.
Yeah, and they don't. He was talking in the interview. He doesn't even know. They don't even know if it's a cancer for sure. No one knows what it is. Quite.
Yeah, it might be related to a virus that causes it's hard to diagnose.
So the book is very inspirational, and it's all the cliche stuff. Don't give up. You never know what can happen. Stay with your family unit. Keep the people around you. But the scientific and clinical aspects of the book are also very interesting. And what he found was that people who have rare diseases are often neglected, where if one was diagnosed with non-small cell lung cancer, breast cancer, bladder cancer, there seems to be much more of a movement. People are talking about it, colon, prostate, all of these things. But if you have a rare cancer or a rare chronic condition, you wake up consistently and there's no hope. There's nobody pouring money in. There's no marathons in your name. And so he talks about that. But then he talks about the inspiring side of it is that there are a lot of people making strides in this. The problem is that they're siloed. Some of the world experts on Castleman had never met each other.
Yeah, that's so interesting. There's not even the funds and the a lot of that political will to bring these people together.
Yeah, and I guess like what would your motivation be? You know, why would you do that? Like there's no pharmaceutical gold rush to cure that. But just like every other, disease and anything has to do with the immune system, they're looking into immunotherapy, and the Human Genome Atlas really changed the game, and that trickle down is going to impact that disease as well. So the book is called Chasing My Cure. He's got pictures in there. He was a quarterback at Georgetown University, And if you juxtapose the picture of him in the book as he's working out as a quarterback at Georgetown with what Castleman does to you, it's quite striking. And
Yeah, I see this. Yep.
it's really, really, really terrible disease. But you can talk to him. I tried to talk to him for weeks, and he had to put it off multiple times because he had a relapse and he had to go back to treatment. So it's very much a fluid situation, and great interview, and just a really inspiring figure, both clinically, scientifically, and as a human. So really excited for this one. Emi, how is Cambodia in the winter? So where are you in relation to the equator?
Not so far off. I'm by one of the tropics. Yeah, it's warm. I got an electric moto, which I love. Electric scooter.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
Plugging in every night.
That sounds like you. When Emi and I first met, she rode her bike to come to my house to record. Yeah, that electric scooter sounds right up your alley.
Very good.
Coming up next on the Post Call Podcast, my interview with Dr. David Fajgenbaum. His book is called Chasing My Cure. That's after the break. Emi, thanks for hanging out. Welcome back to the Post Call Podcast. My next guest this week is the author of Chasing My Cure. Praise for Chasing My Cure includes, this book is so gripping that I read it in one sitting and so moving that I can't stop thinking about it months later. It's an extraordinary memoir filled with wisdom by a doctor who came face to face with his own mortality. It belongs in rare company with Atul Gawande's writings and When Breath Becomes Air. Dr. David Fajgenbaum, thank you so much for coming on the Post Call Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I was producing one of our sister shows, Blood and Cancer, which is our hematology oncology podcast with Dr. David Henry, where we talk about Castleman. And the reason that you know so much about that is because this is a disease that you know all too well. So could you just give me the rundown of what having this, like how, when it started and what your journey was like?
Sure. So I know Castleman disease in a number of different capacities. I was a healthy third-year medical student here at Penn, training to become an oncologist in memory of my mom who had passed away just a few years before. And then I became deathly ill with a mysterious unknown disease. I was hospitalized in ICU at the same hospital that I had been treating patients, and I spent 11 weeks without a diagnosis in multi-organ failure. My liver, my kidneys, my bone marrow, my heart, my lungs, all shutting down, again, with no diagnosis. Gained 70 pounds of fluid. I was in and out of consciousness. And my doctors at a certain point told my family that I was so sick that I likely would not survive. And my family said their goodbyes. And then a priest came in to administer my last rites to me. So that was in November of 2010 when I was 25 years old. Fortunately, right around the time that we thought it was over was when the diagnosis was made of idiopathic multicentric Castleman disease, this rare and deadly immune system disorder where the immune system attacks and shuts down the body's vital organs for an unknown cause. And with the diagnosis came chemotherapy. It's a very poorly understood disease, and at the time there were no FDA-approved drugs. So I got treated with chemotherapy, and that saved my life. But unfortunately, I would go on to have many, many more relapses. And when I relapsed on the only drug in development, it was a drug undergoing a clinical trial for Castleman disease, I learned that there were no other drugs in development and there were no other promising leads. And as a medical student, I made a promise to my family that I would dedicate my life to trying to cure this disease if I survived that fourth deadly episode. And as a medical student, I decided to start performing laboratory research at Penn and creating a foundation. So I now battle Castleman disease as a patient, but also as a physician scientist at Penn, and also as an advocate leading an organization dedicated to trying to cure Castleman disease.
Sure. So if and I can only do my best to put myself in your shoes. If this had been something that had happened to me, I guess it's fight or flight, right? Like your opportunities are to what many patients face all the time, and you chose to fight, which it seems honestly the obvious decision that now, because you're at such an infantile stage in your training when this happens, like this is in a weird way, it's a silver lining that it happened now, because if I had been down the road at another specialty, I wouldn't have had this opportunity.
You're exactly right. It's there is a silver lining there that it happened at the right time, and that I was at a place where I could really fight back. If it happened earlier in my career, later in my career, then I think that the only fighting I could have done would have been, fighting for survival. But there was a point when I was fighting. So I was fighting for survival for several years against this disease. I spent months hospitalized during that 3-year period. And it was all about survival. And then I was very hopeful that some researcher somewhere would figure out a solution for my disease. And it was when I relapsed on that drug and I learned that there was no other work being done or no other promising leads, that's when I realized I could no longer just hope that someone else somewhere figured out my disease. If I was hoping for a treatment, or if I was hoping for a cure, then I needed to turn my hope into action and actually put effort into pushing forward a treatment and a cure. And as you said, if I was at a different stage in my career, I would not have been able to dive into bench science as easily. I would not have been able to leverage the medical community and being able to reach out to colleagues for guidance and advice in ways that I could at that stage of my career.
Yes, I think that you obviously took the opportunity and you made as much of it as you possibly could. For those of you that would like to learn more or greater detail about the disease, we have Dr. Fajgenbaum's interview with Dr. David Henry available. There's a link to it in the show notes that came out a couple months ago for more clinical information. But for us, could you give me a little rundown of what the prevalence of this disease is, diagnoses per 100,000, treatment, relapse, patient population, things like that?
Sure. So there are about 5,000 patients diagnosed each year in the United States. So I think that would be about 500 per 100,000. My math may not
there, yeah.
50 per 100,000. But yeah, so 5,000 patients are diagnosed each year in the U.S. And unfortunately, it affects individuals of all ages. So the youngest patient diagnosed with Castleman disease was diagnosed before his first birthday. Patients can also be diagnosed all the way through any age in life. There are 3 subtypes of Castleman's. Mine is the most deadly subtype, and a third of us with my subtype will die within 5 years of diagnosis, and another third will die within 10 years of diagnosis. So it's it's rare, but it's not that rare. It's about as common as ALS. ALS also has about 5,000 diagnoses per year, certainly a lot less awareness than ALS. And unfortunately, because it's so poorly understood, we actually don't even know whether to categorize it as an autoimmune disease or a cancer. It has features that are similar to cancers and features that are similar to autoimmune disease, but that's why we call it idiopathic, because we don't know what causes it. So it sits in this unusual place between disease categories. We can't even classify it.
Which that's something I would hope that gets figured out with new research down the road. I think another silver lining that I can think of off the top of my head was that while it was good timing in your life to become an advocate and a researcher, it was also good timing in the world of immunology. That was around the time that immunotherapy and the Human Genome Atlas came out. So what has the last 9.5 or about 10 years look like as far as clinical treatment and as far as research?
You're exactly right. So that drug that was experimental for me and that was undergoing a clinical trial that did not work for me, it went on to get FDA approval because it works for about a third of idiopathic multicentric Castleman disease patients. And so it's just life-changing for those third where it works. My lab and our foundation, the CDCN, we focus almost entirely on identifying treatments for the 2/3 of patients who don't benefit from that one FDA-approved drug. And the landscape has changed tremendously. When I was first diagnosed, there actually was not even a diagnostic criteria. You just had to rely on and hope that a physician knew what to look for and knew how to make the diagnosis from reading the medical literature. So we established the first ever diagnostic criteria a couple years ago. I mentioned that siltuximab became the first FDA-approved drug a few years ago. We published the first treatment guidelines last year. And then just this year, we published the first what we call novel drug target. So the first new thing to go after with a drug that's been identified in 25 years. And this particular thing that we're identifying and drug that we're going after it with is actually based on the laboratory work that I did at UPenn. So I mentioned I had my fourth time I almost died was when I committed my life to fighting this disease as a medical student. And then, unfortunately, about a year later, in the midst of all of my work, I nearly died for a fifth time. I spent about a month hospitalized with multi-organ failure, and I survived again thanks to 7 different chemotherapies. But at that stage, I was engaged to my wife, and I knew that if I wanted to make it to our wedding day of May 24th, 2014, that I would need to identify a drug that could prevent a relapse. Everything else had failed. Any drug that had ever been tried for my disease had failed. And so I ran a series of experiments, and I spent weeks going through data to try to identify a signal in the data that could maybe help to identify a drug that had never been used before for Castleman disease that could maybe help me. Ideally, a drug that was already FDA approved for something else so we could use it off label. And from my research and from the experiments, I found a signal in the data that suggested that this drug that was developed 25 years ago for kidney transplantation might actually be effective in preventing a relapse for me. And so I started myself on it back in early 2014. I made it to our wedding date, and it actually has now been over 5.5 years that I've been in remission on this drug. And based on my success and the drug keeping me in this extended remission, we've actually begun giving it to other Castleman disease patients. And we just recently launched a clinical trial this past month to formally evaluate its efficacy in a large cohort of patients.
And obviously the difficulties of getting things like this through when the disease is so rare it presents a special challenge. But I wanted to switch gears. You mentioned fighting to get to your wedding day, and looking through the pictures of the book now. The first one is that you look to be about 6'1", 220 playing weight at Georgetown at quarterback. I hope I'm about right there.
That's right. I'm impressed. Yeah,
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm waiting for the Eagles or the Giants. Somebody to call me to be a scout any day now. But you can see these juxtapositions of your health, and I see that your wife and your then, I guess, fiance or girlfriend sticking with you through all of this. But what the kind of guy that you strike me as, reading about 2/3 of the book and seeing the pictures, is you wanted to do action. You were, a man of your teammates, a man of your family, but now you write this book and you take a step back and you do memoir. You have this memoir. It seems like this is an opportunity to raise awareness for the disease, but also maybe a little bit therapeutic for yourself. So why write the book, and how long has it been in the works, and how was the process?
You're absolutely right. It was therapeutic in ways that I think there were memories from my battle in the hospital where I spent months in critical condition, and most of that time I was unconscious, but a lot of the time I was conscious, and I did have thoughts, and I was terrified, and there were feelings and emotions that my wife and I completely buried away. So we had to pull those out in writing this book. I had to bring back all these old memories, and we had discussions that we actually had never had, where we talked about things in the hospital that we actually had just never spoken about since then. They were such difficult memories, and you would think that would mean that it was a tough it was a tough process, but you'd think that would mean that it would have been a bad process. But actually, it was therapeutic, and you're exactly right that there were a lot of positives that came from digging back those old memories. And maybe if it was possible, I actually appreciate and love my wife even more, kind of knowing more about the details, because when I was unconscious, I didn't know about a lot that was going on. So I think that there were some positives that came from that. The reason I wrote this book is because I learned so much about life and about living from nearly dying 5 times, lessons that I wish I didn't have to go through all that I went through to learn them, and lessons that I feel like I kind of have a responsibility to share with others, so other people don't have to wait until their final days to learn them. And so it's kind of, for me, number one is like, I've gone through all this. It's been awful. And you mentioned silver linings, but wouldn't it be a great silver lining if we could actually have other people be inspired, motivated, maybe even change their lives based on what I went through? Because I've certainly changed my life. I mean, I learned, like I said, so many things about how how precious life is, and about how important the people that you love are. And so if I can share these with other people, then that's an incredible silver lining. And just as you said, the other two main goals for me were to raise awareness about Castleman disease. We were still in this fight. The book's called Chasing My Cure, but we haven't caught it yet. We're still chasing my cure. I'm on this drug. It's been 5.5 years now. I've been in remission, but I don't know if it'll come back tomorrow. And unfortunately for other patients, it hasn't helped all of the patients that we've given it to. So we still have a long way to go for Castleman disease. And so number 2 is to raise awareness to keep getting us closer to a cure for Castleman disease. And number 3 is to look beyond Castleman disease at all these other rare diseases. There are 7,000 rare diseases that affect 30 million Americans. 1 in 10 Americans have a rare disease, and 95% of those diseases do not have a single FDA-approved drug. The drug I'm on was developed for something else years ago. And so I want to raise awareness about, A, the problem within rare diseases, but B, a possible solution could be that there are drugs that already exist that might actually be treatments for patients that don't currently have any. But we're not going to know unless we turn our hope for cures into action. We actually start taking action to figure these things out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's such an interesting dynamic because I completely understand when something is ultra prevalent, let's say lung cancer or HIV and AIDS, it becomes a crisis, and there's a lot of resources thrown into that, and obviously no arguments here. But on the other side, there are people who just wake up and like, there is no hope, and that is such a crushing darkness.
You're exactly right. And for most rare diseases, that's how it is. 95% don't have an FDA-approved drug. And many of those patients, there isn't even anything to give them hope. As you said, there isn't anything coming down the pipeline. And so I want my story to to be shared as an example that we should have hope, because, if you asked me in the middle of my journey whether there would be a drug that would save my life and help other patients' lives, I would have said probably no. I mean, I was hopeful, but I was realistic that it was unlikely. But even in the midst of kind of these unlikely circumstances, like here I am today. I'm running a research lab studying Castleman disease. I'm on the phone with you. I'm married to Caitlin, the love of my life. We now have a daughter. These are things that I never thought were possible, that have happened, and I hope for other patients with rare diseases that they can see that it is possible. However, our hopes and prayers for cures will not happen unless we all join the fight, unless we all turn our hope for cures into action, whether that's raising money for the given rare disease or awareness or getting involved in research in some ways. These things won't happen unless we take action.
So one of my favorite mediums in the world are high school and college graduation speeches, and your story reminds me of a much more intense version of I believe Conan O'Brien gave a speech in 2010, 2011 at Dartmouth where he said something that I'm drawing a line for your experience was, they say that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but what they omit is that it almost kills you. And yeah, and when you're out of that, it's that you have a level of motivation, but also a perspective that is hard to describe. And for so long, maybe you didn't have anything to say, but you come out of this and now you finally have something to say, and you're putting this gift of ambition and intelligence to use with this gift of burden. And so now that you write this book and you're here, and you metaphorically you have your speech to give, but what does the next 10 years look like should you be lucky enough to experience them?
Wow. I love all the things you shared, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think that for the next 10 years, I want my legacy, whether it's the next 10 days or the next 10 years that I have to be on this earth, I want my legacy to be that I did what I could to share these kind of almost like secrets that we never get to hear, because those that go to the brink 5 times typically don't get to share about it. Those that have their last rites read to them don't get to share about it. And so I want to share these lessons that I suspect many people that have learned them feel like they learned them too late. And I want to share these lessons because as you said, I have this unfortunate burden, but experience that can actually be positive for others. I also want a really important legacy to be highlighting all of these drugs that are already FDA approved that could be treatments for patients that don't have any. These are solutions that could just be hiding in plain sight. The drug that I'm on was at my nearby neighborhood CVS for those 3 years where I was in and out of the ICU, nearly dying 5 times, but no one had ever thought to try sirolimus for me. How many other drugs are there out there just like that are sitting at the neighborhood CVS, and there are patients that are dying, that are walking past the CVS in their dying days, and that drug's in there, but just no one's thought to try it. And so I really, I hope that gets to be part of my legacy, and that's one of the main reasons why I wrote this book.
Right. Yeah, I think that this is another example of, in my opinion, I think that the education in medicine is scientific, but the practice of medicine is artistic. It's waking up with a specific motivation or whatever, just having a gut feeling about something. There are obviously dozens and dozens of stories where someone just kind of tried something. The pap smear saved an infinite amount of lives, and that was just a guy in a lab, right? I mean, so the micro scientific thing to take out of this is what's specific to Castleman. But I think the macro is what you're saying is that anybody with the rare disease or doing this kind of research, the collaboration is extremely important.
Yes.
So my question is, when you get this diagnosis, and obviously you're motivated for Castleman, but did it align with what your ambitions were medically, and how has it been working with people in oncology, immunology, and whatever other circles need to be worked in?
Yeah, when I first became interested in the cancer space, as I mentioned earlier, my mom passed away from cancer when I was in college, and that really was the ultimate motivation for me to say I want to dedicate my life to fighting cancer. And she was the most amazing person, and seeing what it did to her gave me this real sense of wanting to get revenge on cancer. And interestingly, my early efforts in cancer research, I went to graduate school at Oxford, and I focused a lot of my time in graduate school on collaboration within and across cancer and cardiovascular disease. There actually are the risk factors that increase your risk the greatest for cardiovascular disease: smoking, diet, and exercise are also the most important risk factors for cancer prevention. And I learned pretty quickly that there was no collaboration occurring, and I was really focused on how do we improve collaboration between researchers within oncology, but also even just across the medical field, people that are studying the same sort of things, but that have implications for different diseases. And I was really fascinated, but also disturbed that there wasn't more collaboration going on. So then when I was diagnosed with Castleman disease and really was struggling, I was, I think, surprised to see that this issue of collaboration is really across medicine, and it's worst within rare diseases, because for a common disease, you might be able to have enough patients or physicians or researchers at one institution to really make important progress. But for rare diseases, there just are not enough patients, doctors, or researchers at any one institution to make meaningful progress. You have to collaborate. By definition, if you study a rare disease, you have to work with researchers at other institutions, patients around the world. And so this issue of collaboration that I had started to study before I ever became ill, all of a sudden became kind of the critical piece to this puzzle for Castleman disease. We couldn't do this alone. I was working in the lab, but there was no way I was going to make enough progress on my own. And so getting people together, facilitating collaboration, and getting patients and physicians and researchers to propose ideas, and then finding the best people in the world to do them was really kind of like a game changer for us in Castleman disease. So collaboration has been key. And then the other piece has been saying, let's collaborate to generate insights, and then let's see what drugs already exist that maybe can already help patients tomorrow, instead of having to develop a new drug that'll help patients 20 years from now.
Yeah, I think that this is exemplified. I believe it's chapter 12 of your book. I have it open here. Dr. Van Rhee had the only lab dedicated to studying IMCD, but there were researchers across the world, France, Japan, and elsewhere in the United States, but they had never met, and their studies were inadequately powered, which it seems counterintuitive that there are, if there are so many people with the disease and there are even fewer working on it, and at this point, they hadn't even met or collaborated in any way, and they're working on the same thing.
It was shocking to me. I mean, I remember talking to Dr. Vandery and saying, okay, let's come up with a list of people to talk to for our first call. He gave me this list of people, and I said, okay, do you mind sharing their email addresses? And he was like, oh, I actually never emailed with them before. Like, you can find it online, but I've never emailed. And I was like, wait, what? We've this community's never even emailed before, and it's like, well, there must have been calls, right? No, we've never had a call before. You never had a call, never met? What? And I think what I've realized as I've gotten deeper into this fight is that it's no one person's fault that there wasn't collaboration going on. I mean, us physicians and researchers, it's not really necessarily part of our job description to facilitate collaboration worldwide. I mean, we are, our goal is to drive forward research in our quote unquote lab, but we can drive forward a lot more research in our lab if we work with other labs. And so I think that I found this is just this incredible untapped opportunity to just get people together. I mean, man, that's simple. Anyone can get people together. And so all we had to do was connect them through email, connect them through phone calls, and then start holding meetings to connect them in person, and everything started to change.
It's spoken like a true quarterback, frankly. So I want to learn a little bit. How'd you like that segue? So I can learn a little bit more about you now. Just off the top of my head, were you at Georgetown when Villanova won the national championship?
I was not there when they won the national championship. I was there just before they really returned to incredible glory. I was there 2003 to 2007, and actually my senior year, Georgetown made it to the Final Four.
Oh no! I'm talking about football.
We're the worst team. Wait, say that again.
Villanova won the national championship. What, in 2009?
You're saying in football, in 1AA in football.
Yes.
I think it was right after I was there. I think you're right. So
I just took that opportunity to stick the knife in a little bit.
When you play football at Georgetown,
you go basketball.
And people ask you about national championships, you start thinking about basketball.
Yeah, sure. No, I completely agree. I saw an opportunity to maybe stick the knife in a little bit and get the rivalry thing, because you're from Philly, it says, and you're in Philadelphia now.
So I'm from North Carolina, but I live in Philadelphia now, and
Gotcha.
Philadelphia has become my new home. My wife and her family are from the area.
Right. So you meet your wife here, and you've got roots, and you've got everything. It seems like a clear mission. But what do you do for fun, and how do you blow off steam? And this is kind of ominous work. It's inspiring work, but it's probably very difficult. So what is day in and day out of your life to hobbies and your I believe you have one child. You're married. So what's your life like?
Yeah, so for me, in going through what I've gone through, it kind of helped me to focus my life in a way that I never was able to necessarily focus before, and that's that I spend all of my time with the people I love, or working on the research that I'm driving forward. And so for me, that's spending any time where I'm really not in the lab and I'm not here at Penn driving forward science. It's spending time with my wife and daughter, my in-laws. I spend most of my time with my wife and daughter, and I've got amazing friends in Philadelphia that I also spend time with. But it's really for me just maximizing this time with my wife and daughter Amelia. They bring me so much joy, and going through what I've gone through really has helped to focus me on those things. I used to, as you mentioned from that picture, I played college football, and I used to work out all the time, and was kind of a fanatic and crazy about exercise. And now my exercise is walking to and from work. So I don't exercise like I used to. But for me, it's kind of just all about maximizing the time that I spend doing research, because I really love the science and love the research I'm doing, and then spending time with the people that I love.
Well, making the most out of a bad situation, making your curse your gift. He's Dr. David Fajgenbaum. I thank you so much for joining us. The book is called Chasing My Cure. It's being compared by New York Times reviewers to When Breath Becomes Air, the mega-selling memoir about a similar situation. So Dr. David Fajgenbaum, thank you so much for coming on Post Call Podcast, and we'll put a link to where people can find your book and a link to the Blood and Cancer episode about more clinical information about Castleman, and, of course, a link to anything else that you would like to raise awareness for. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me on and helping to spread the word about our work trying to chase my cure and hopefully chase many more cures as well. Thank you.
Of course, and I think the bigger message, if you're not involved in this kind of work, just collaborate with other people who might be involved in something similar in what you do.
Exactly, and how you live. There are things that I wish I knew before that I know now, and I hope that those lessons are motivational and inspiring for readers.
Dr. Fajgenbaum, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. We're out. Like I said, get a week. Email me. Maybe you want to take out a name or take out an anecdote or whatever, and then we'll email you when everything goes live. It won't be next week. The week after, it might be the first weekend in December.
Cool. Well, this was awesome. I really enjoyed it. Would it be helpful for you to have pictures that could go with it? I was just mentioning like the football picture. I don't know. Is there a way that pictures can be connected with it, or do you think we should just do like the?
Well, if they're available online anywhere, with your permission, I can just take them. If I can Google them, I can take them.
Yeah, feel free. Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to grab any pictures. Because you mentioned the football one, and then also, when you see the football one, then you're like, was this guy ever really sick? He looks pretty healthy, and then it's like sometimes the really sick pictures are actually pretty powerful.
I like the football one juxtaposed with what I'm guessing is fluid weight with the selfie in the back.
Yes, in my belly. Yeah, bald from chemo and tons of fluid because my liver and kidneys weren't working.
Yeah, and those are not that far apart if I'm doing my math right. Yeah, about a year.
That's right. Yeah, they were only a few years apart.
Okay,
You're right.
Cool. I'll definitely do that. And yeah, like I said, we'll get all this information to you. It lives on the internet forever, so you can reference it at any time.
Well, thank you so much. This is awesome. I mean, you clearly did your homework. You've clearly done this a bunch of times before, and it was really fun.
I really appreciate that. All right, well, have a good Friday and take care.
Thanks so much.